do today is we're going to put together a little chart that you'll use for these estimation problems. And after a while, you probably won't even need it. But I want to get these down for you just so you can see them. And we can use that to solve these problems. And we're going to estimate, which means the process should be quick for you to find the answer to each of these. It should also be accurate to what the real answer would be. So I'm going to give you a various list of percents and fractions that would go with them. 1% is going to be 1/100th. 2% in simplest form will be 1/50th. 5% is going to be 1/20th. 10% is going to be 1/10th. Now, we're going to keep going with these, but why don't we use 3%, 4%, 8%, because we're going to use benchmarks. And we're going to be able to pick which ones fit the best based on the problems that we're using, okay? As we continue, we can jump right to 20%. 20% is going to be 1/5. 25%, 1/4. We could probably use 30%. 30% is going to equal 3/10, right? 33% is going to be 1/3. These fractions will make sense in a minute. Let's go to 40%. If 20% is 1/5, then 40% must be 2/5. 50% is going to be half. 60%, again, 20 is 1/5, 40 is 2/5, 60 must be 3/5. 67%, 66%, 67 is going to be about 2/3. Probably no need to go 70% when we got 67 and 75%. 3/4. 80%. 4/5. 90%. 9/10. 100% equals 1 whole. Once you have all these down, please do it quickly. Just put your pen or pencil down, and I can see who's finished. Actually, I can probably end up doing it on the same in this little area here. So you're going to see problems like this. Let's say 50% of 89. All right, and when we estimate this, the first thing I want you to do is to pick one of the percents that you have on your chart that's closest to the percent that's given. In this case, it's 50%. 50% was what fraction? So let's use half, okay? Let's use half. Now, when we look at these, you're going to focus here on the 89. You're going to say, what number closest to 89 is divisible by the denominator in this case, which is 2. This number here, 89. Is 89 divisible by 2? What is? 90. Let's use 90. Okay. But you said you were thinking something. We already have the percent. See, the percent's represented here by the fraction half. So here's what we do. We say, all right, if 90 is divisible by 2, what is it divided by 2? What is 90 cut in half? Brandon? 45. Then I look up top. How many of those 45s do I need? 1. Therefore, my answer is 45. Okay? So we use the fraction that's associated with the percent, and then we look at the denominator to find out divisibility, okay, and we use it that way. We didn't even have to strafe off 50% because we already had 50% up there. Okay? Any questions? %10 of 302. First thing we're going to look at is the fraction. Do I even have to choose one that's close to 10%, or do I have one that's already 10%? I already have one, so let's use 1/10. Okay? Now, a couple of different ways you can look at this. Anytime you have 3 digits or more, you should just look at the first 2. Just look at the first 2. Then you would say, if I'm dealing with 1/10, what number closest to 30 is divisible by 10? 30. So I would use 30, make that a 0. What is? Anytime you have this third or fourth digit, once you round those first 2, the rest of them just become zeros after. What is 300 divided by 10? How many 30s do we need? Therefore, 30 would be our answer. Now here's the other way to look at it. Could we have kept it the same? If we would say, is 302 divisible by 10? 10 we also know as a power of 10. Could we divide 302 by 10? Very easily. How? Move the decimal one place to the left. We just divided it by 10. So I would accept 30. I would also accept 30.2. Is there much of a difference between 30 and 30.2? Not at all. Especially when we estimate, we're trying to find something that's close, and that does the trick. Okay? And I don't all work like that, but if you're using 1/10 and you're dividing by 10, it's a simple matter of moving the decimal one place, right? 1, 0. Okay? All right, let's see. Let's give you one. 30% of 295. First thing you... So what do we use for 30%? Any suggestions? Yeah, just use the 3/10. I mean, if we've got a fraction we can use with the one that's given, we haven't even had to adjust these yet, so we'll just use that. Now I'm going to look at the first 2 digits, right? This one will end up being a 0, whatever we decide for the first 2, and say, what number closest to 29 is divisible by 10? 30. Therefore, what we'll do is say that's 30, make that last digit a 0. What is 300 divided by 10? 30. How many 30s do we need? 3 30s equal 90. That's why we look also at the numerator. All right, that was the first one we had like that, where we had something other than 1 as the numerator. How many of you got it? Good. To start. Just getting the hang of it, that's all it is. Just getting the hang of the process, seeing things for how they are. 1% of 512. Now, do we have a 1% fraction that we can use? We sure do. 1 over 100. Okay. Now, again, what do you notice about the denominator? Very similar to what we had before when we had 1/10. What would we call 100? Power of 10. 10 to the what power? Second power. Okay? So as before, when I divided by the 10, I moved the decimal one place because there was 1 0 for 100. Can I just keep the 512 as is and move it 2 places to the left? Sure I can. Equals. And that's not even an estimation. That would be the actual. That would be the actual just by how it worked out. Okay? It would be exactly 5.12. All right? 25% of 59. You try this one. 25% of 59. Fraction. 25%. 1/4. Number closest to 59 divisible by 4. 60. 1/4 of 60. 60 divided by 4 then is what? How many 15s? There it is. Good? One more. 90% of 49. Fraction. 9/10. Looking at the first 2 digits, there's only 2 digits. Divisible by 10. 50. What is 50 divided by 10? 5. How many 5s do we need? Equals 45. Okay. Are we good with this? Yes? Awesome. Moving on. We need to be able to estimate a 15% tip. I know we've done this last year, but probably use a little bit of refresher. I like to do not only a 15, but also a 20% tip. So you go out to eat, maybe you and a friend or you and a couple of friends, and you get the bill, and it comes back as $41.90. Well, the first thing you want to do is you want to estimate the amount of your bill. You would say that $41.90 is about how much? Let's use 42. Okay. So we're going to estimate a 15% and a 20% tip on a $42 bill. Now, what you want to do is we want to break these up. So let's take a look at the 15% tip first. Okay. Now, if we break it up to a 10% and a 5%, what's 10 plus 5? 15. Okay. Now, this is real simple. What is 10% of 42? $4.20. Okay, all we do is move the decimal one place in our estimated bill amount. 5% is what in comparison to 10%? Half. So if it's half, then it's also half of this amount. What's half of 420? $2.10. Add them up. 15% tip looks like $6.30. 20% is even easier because all we're going to do is combine a 10% tip with another 10% tip. If I already know that 10% is 420 plus another 420, the difference, or together, it makes it $8.40. So your answer for a 15% tip, $6.30. For a 20% tip, $8.40. 40 cents. Okay. Any questions? 15% is maybe considered a little low by a lot of people's standards. People that work in the service industry, that work as waitresses, waiters, um, you know, they'd hope to get something more in the 20% range or more than that. Your servers, your waiters, waitresses, when you go out to eat, a lot of the times they don't make an hourly wage that's minimum wage, because their employer factors in the tips that they would make as part of their hourly salary, which you may, hopefully if you're at the right place, you'll make good tips and your hourly wage will be pretty good. But if you're not, and you work at a place where people aren't tipping very well, you really struggle. Obviously, what conclusion can you draw? If that was a $41.90 bill, are you eating at a, if it's a couple of people, are you eating at a fine dining establishment? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. So if you work at a place where the prices are a little bit lower, you may not have the opportunity, percentage-wise, for the bigger tips. If you work at a place that's more fine dining and they're charging $50 per plate for a steak dinner and whatever else, get a couple of people out on an anniversary, it could easily go through $150 just for dinner. Which, $150, if we take a look at 15% on 150, if we say, okay, 10% is what? $15. What's half of that? $7.50. A 15% tip on a bill that's $150 is putting you at what? $22.50. 20% is even better. The 10%, which is 15, plus another 10%, which is another 15. That's a 30%. That's a $30 tip. Okay. So yeah, the bigger the bill is, the more tip that they should expect. Now, not all people tip, but that's why if you go to a restaurant sometimes and you have more than like 6 people at your table, what they'll do is they'll automatically factor in the tip, and that's part of your bill. Because whoever's serving you, if there's 6 people at your table or 8 people at your table, they're working that much harder than they would if there were just 2 of you. Making sure waters are filled up and all the other kind of stuff. So yeah, it's not a bad industry to get into. I think a lot of it is finding the right place and getting into the right clientele that are going to tip you. $8.60. First of all, we would estimate the amount of the bill to be about what? Oh, $9, right? So let's calculate the 15%. Break it down into 10 plus 5. 10% of $9 is what? Move the decimal one place. 90 cents. Plus half of 90 cents, which is 45 cents. So 90 cents plus 45 cents, $1.35. 20%. So 10% we said was 90% or 90 cents. Plus another 10%, which is another 90 cents, equals 180. Not much of a difference there between 15% and 20% when you're dealing with a bill that's extremely low. Any questions? Try one on your own? No? 7910. All right, in terms of ease, what would be the easiest to work with for $79, Josiah? Yeah, let's just use 80. We use $79, then it makes it even that more difficult to find the tip. You use 80, it's much easier. So 10% of 80 becomes what? 8. Plus half of that is 4 equals 12. Then for 10 here, plus 10 is going to be an 8 plus an 8, which equals 16. Okay. So the difference between the 15 and the 20 is a little bit more profound there, you know, good $4. So, good. Any questions? Sale price. You've been in the store before, you've been shopping, and they run a certain percent off, okay? So if we say 40% off of a $42 necklace. Now, a couple of different ways of looking at this. If it's 40%, you could use what fraction? 2/5. Then you would say what number closest to 42 is divisible by 5? Want to use 40? That's fine for now. And then we'd say, all right, 40 divided by 5 is 8. How many 8s do we need? So that's 16. But is our answer 16? No, because I'm going to take that 16 off of the 40. We're looking at paying somewhere around what? 40 minus the 16 would be about paying $24 for it. Okay. Pretty good deal. Almost half off, right? Almost half off. 50% off a sofa for $7.89. Try that one. %. Right? So we could use half. Number closest to 789, that's going to make it really easy for us to cut in half would be what? How about 800? I mean, once you get to this point with this large of an amount, well, then we're overestimating, which is fine. So half of 800 should be 400.